The war that many of us have been worried about is finally here. Israel and the US have attacked Iran, unalived its head of state while negotiations were still in progress, and are now carpet bombing Tehran. And of course, now we're looking at a battle that has the potential to pull the whole world into something resembling the biblical Armageddon. Some say by design. And it's starting to look like this war might be what the famed fourth turning is all about. In this short episode, we're going to explore the astrology of this conflict. We're going to examine some of the deeper and weirder undercurrents driving it. And we're going to ask where all this could be heading. Because this year, there are a lot of conflict signals still to come, as well as others that suggest we may see much stranger events that change the course of history. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. Operation Epic Fury, or Operation APAC Fury as some are calling it, started on February the 28th as Mars squared Uranus. Mars, the war planet, attacks. Uranus brings a shocking, surprising, and volatile flavor to events. Together, these planets reliably bring violence. Here's where Uranus was on February the 28th, the day Ayatollah Khomeini was killed. It was in the 28th degree of Taurus, conjunct the highly malefic fixed star Algol. Algol, meaning the ghoul, represents the Medusa's head. And Mars was at 28 Aquarius, the exact degree of February's solar eclipse in that sign. Besides decapitation, Algol is also associated with injustice and violence against women. The Israeli-US campaign began with a missile attack on a girls' school in Minab in southern Iran, which killed around 170 people, most of them schoolgirls. The UN has called this a grave violation of humanitarian law, as if the attackers care about that. Right now, we're seeing Uranus finishing up its transit through Taurus. And as we know, we can translate all the zodiac signs into regions of the world using the geodetic map technique. The Taurus zone is this one. Since Uranus entered this sign in 2018, we've seen major conflicts that have scarred the world and its conscience all across this particular zone, including Gaza, Ukraine, Lebanon, Yemen, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Sudan. And Iran is in this zone too, and it's also been associated specifically with Taurus for a very long time by astrologers. I've been thinking for some time that given the well-known desire of American neocons and Israel to destroy Iran, it was quite likely that before Uranus's transit through Taurus was up, the country would be attacked. And so it's come to pass. Now let's talk about the even bigger picture. Right now, we're seeing a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, which went exact on February the 20th of 2026. These conjunctions come every 36 years, but this one appeared in the very first degree of the entire zodiac. We haven't seen a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in this degree since 4360 BC, around the time of the first known civilization in the world, that of Sumer, which appeared in what is today's Iraq. That suggests to me that what we're watching right now isn't just any ordinary episode of history. It's one that's setting up an entirely new era of human history that will be fundamentally different to what's come before. So bear that in mind. This is not business as usual. Everything that's happening now, including this war and what's coming out about how the world is run through the Epstein files, has that level of significance. Now, when Saturn and Neptune come together, we tend to see the dissolution, Neptune, of old structures, Saturn. Reality and the world order itself are reconfiguring themselves right now. Few would deny that, whether or not they believe in astrology. But this is exactly what the astrology says should be happening now. It's about as powerful a demonstration of the validity of this art as you could ask for. Now, certain countries resonate particularly strongly to the Saturn-Neptune complex, and one of them is Iran. At the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of 1953, a coup backed by the CIA and MI6 ousted the leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, ushering in an era of rule by the despotic Shah. At the conjunction of 1989, the man who led the revolution of 1979 and became supreme leader of Iran died, and he was replaced by Ayatollah Ali Khomeini. Now, Ali Khomeini has been killed by the Americans and Israelis, which seems to have been something he expected to happen and did little to stop. The leading contender to replace him is his son, Mojtaba Khomeini. Saturn-Neptune, a dissolution of the ruling regime, the ruling structure. and a new one taking its place. So this pattern has held almost like clockwork in the 20th century for Iran. These Saturn-Neptune conjunctions also herald changes to the world order itself, including a collective understanding of how the world is supposed to work. The last conjunctions in 1989 in the institutional sign of Capricorn led to the fall of the Soviet Union and the emergence of the unipolar, US-led, so-called rules-based international order, when supposedly the world was run in accordance with international law and institutions like the UN. It was all illusory, of course. The US was in charge all along and generally did what it wanted, but its leaders did at least pay lip service to these principles. Think of how much effort George W. Bush put into getting international agreement for his invasion of Iraq. Now, the current conjunction is happening in Aries, and Aries just does what it wants. It's not interested in highfalutin justifications for its actions. It just pursues its will and divine or demonic inspiration. And so we've entered a new era that seems to be characterized by the principle of might makes right. There are no rules. The US and Israel have launched a war because they wanted to, and killed a country's leader because they wanted to, or because Netanyahu wanted to, which is essentially the same thing right now. So those are some factors around the big picture. What we're going to do now is look at the natal chart for Israel, because it's telling us some very interesting things. If you're enjoying this video so far, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel and enable notifications. All that stuff really helps me win the great battle with the algorithm. Thanks. This is the Israel chart set for May the 14th, 1948, 4 p.m. in Tel Aviv. Now, I want you to notice this stellium of planets in Leo, the 11th whole sign house. We have the Moon, Mars, Saturn, and Pluto. This is an extremely intense, even ruthless combination of planets in the house that represents the allies of the state of Israel. My interpretation is that these planets in the 11th house represent Israel's intense and ruthless focus on control of its allies, in particular the US, which still occupies a leonine, which is to say, central place in the world. And that, in my opinion, is a view confirmed by the Epstein files and by Epstein's very obvious connections to the Zionist project. Consider the Maxwell family and its well-known relationship to Israel. Consider that Epstein specifically told Peter Thiel in the files that he represented the Rothschilds, the global banking dynasty that founded Israel. See the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the year of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, for more on that. Now, this natal chart for Israel features the moon at 4 degrees and 21 minutes of Leo. It's currently being opposed by Pluto. The moon represents the people in a mundane chart. I think the opposition from Pluto speaks to an intense confrontation leading to destructive effects on the population of the country. And look what's happening. Tehran is being flattened just like Gaza. Beirut is now being targeted for the same treatment. And in response, missiles are raining down on Tel Aviv and Israelis are in bunkers. Now, Pluto is going to make 3 oppositions with the moon in this chart. It made its first one on February the 22nd this year, just days before this war started. It will make another on July the 24th, 2026, and a third and final one on July the 1st, 2027. So that suggests that this is far from over. But there's something else. The moon in this chart is the ruler of the midheaven. So it also represents the leadership of the country and its public reputation. I think I don't need to explain that that's taken a massive hit in recent years, following the G word in Gaza. And now with the release of the Epstein files and the launch of yet another war, this one begun with the murder of the head of an enemy state. People are starting to think that the rules just don't seem to apply to this country, and they're wondering why. All right, we need to move on now to the bigger picture, because there are weirder things going on beneath the brutal surface of these events. It goes without saying that there are religious dimensions to all of this, and indeed to the whole Zionist project itself. Bear in mind that Jerusalem is a holy city for all 3 of the Abrahamic religions. Control of Jerusalem has been fought over for millennia. I think it's clear that we're watching efforts to fulfill the Greater Israel Project, which is the idea derived from scripture that Israel's territory should extend from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Of course, this would require Israel taking over large parts of Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. You get told this is a conspiracy theory, but then Netanyahu has specifically said he is very attached to this vision.
אתה מתחבר לחזון? מאוד. Mehmet? No. Israel ist schlimmer.
As are many of his far-right ministers. I'm not willing to just pretend this stuff isn't happening when my best estimation is that it is, and especially given that people are getting blown to smithereens in service of it. And of course, now we're looking at a battle that has the potential to pull the whole world into something resembling the biblical Armageddon. Some say by design. And it's starting to look like this war might be what the famed fourth turning is all about. Back in September 2025, I made a video with the astrologer Adam Sommer about this idea of the fourth turning. The fourth turning refers to a theory of history called Strauss-Howe generational theory, which holds that Anglo-American history in particular follows a roughly 80 to 90 year cycle. This cycle unfolds in 4 phases called turnings, which last around 20 years each or a bit more, and they're connected to the various generations in society. That's the mechanism that drives this cycle. In the last of these phases, the fourth turning, there's a great conflict which resolves the tensions, dissolves outworn structures, and prepares the ground for a new cycle under the rule of the victors. For example, the 3 previous fourth turnings saw the Revolutionary War, then 80 years later, the Civil War, then 80 years later, the Second World War. Each time the US engaged in a massive conflict that ended up transforming the country. But as Adam and I pointed out in that earlier video, and as many other astrologers have noted, this is also roughly equivalent to the 84-year cycle of Uranus. Uranus was in Gemini at the US Declaration of Independence in 1776, and the subsequent conflicts have coincided with its return to that sign. What's more, in the US Sibley natal chart, Uranus is in the 7th house of open enemies with the war planet Mars. Hence why this cycle always seems to end in war. Of course, right now, Uranus is transitioning into Gemini once again. It spent 4 months in that sign last year, moved back into Taurus, and will return to Gemini on April the 26th. Now, in the bonus section of that fourth turning video, which was paywalled for members of World Astrology Report, Adam and I talked about the possibility that the fourth turning could involve some kind of religious war involving the 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And one of the reasons for that is that Strauss and Howe say in their book that the fourth turning is always foreshadowed in the third turning by a great crisis event that serves as a kind of preview of what's coming. The third turning of our current cycle saw the September 11th event, which is not something I can talk about much here because YouTube, for some reason, just buries anything related to it. However, it has been noted that a huge tranche of Epstein files have been held back from around the time of that event and the period leading up to it. Strange. Of course, it's also quite well known by now that Epstein had this painting in his house. Even stranger. I won't go more into this subject here, but again, think of that event as potentially comprising a precursor to the fourth turning crisis that seems to be getting into gear this year. And also, think of the theme of false flags. I talk about this in more detail in the bonus section of this video available for members of this channel, whether you're here on YouTube or at my website, worldastrologyreport.com. Signing up at the website or here at correspondent tier will give you access to my live streams too. And now I'm going to give you a long excerpt from the bonus section of that fourth turning video, because I think that what Adam and I said there is starting to become uncomfortably real.
Now, if it escalates, like my feeling is that the center of all of it will be kind of like a racing toward Armageddon idea, like the 3 Abrahamic religions really coming to a head, not based off of geopolitics as much as their translation of the scriptures. And that's something I have a really strong and bad feeling about, like with all of the stuff that's happening.
The 3 Abrahamic religions have something in common, an eschatological perspective, which sees history as a linear story with a great apocalyptic climax at its end. The Jews foresee the coming of their Messiah, the Christians foresee the return of the Christ, and Muslims see the coming of the Mahdi.
And so just to bring it up, because the influence on my theory here actually comes from Michael Bajan's final book called Racing Toward Armageddon. And he makes a pretty strong case about, what they're all planning and how they translate, like their versions of Revelation, stuff like that. And when you get these telltale signs, like, for example, the birth of the red heifer, just a month before October 7th happens, and you know what that means, and you understand the context, and you are aware of the breeding programs, the alliance, the strange alliance between like fundamentalist Judaism and Christians, and how they're trying to speed up this process to like get the red heifer to be born so they can sacrifice it and mix the ashes and build the third temple and all this type of stuff. It's a narrative that begins to make a lot of sense.
Now, in March of 2024, I put out a video entitled Eclipses, Red Heifers and the Apocalypse, which you can find on YouTube or on the website. And in that video, I noted the spiritual undercurrents of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which involved the apocalyptic beliefs of certain Christian and Jewish factions regarding the building of the third temple in Jerusalem to usher in the end of the world. Now, supposedly, among the many things that need to be done to build the temple is the sacrifice of a perfect red heifer, which needs to be burned and the ashes mixed with water. That water can then be used to purify the priests who will build the temple, or something like that anyway. There has been a development on that front. On July the 8th, Jewish priests in Israel carried out what was billed as a practice sacrifice of a red heifer. Supposedly, the cow wasn't perfectly unblemished, so this wasn't the actual sacrifice needed to build the temple. It was supposedly a practice run. However, since that time, some figures connected to the red heifer story, including Byron Stinson, the Texas farmer who actually bred the red heifers that were sent to Israel, have claimed that this was in fact the real sacrifice of a perfect red heifer, and that it was labeled a practice run to avoid media outrage. A man named Adam King, who tweets as @AwesomeJew, recently appeared on the Tim Pool podcast, claiming that this was in fact the case. He even claimed that the ashes have been used to miraculously cure sick people. And something people have been talking about is the potential for the conflict in the Middle East to go nuclear, given, of course, that Israel has nukes and the war is supposedly being fought to prevent Iran from getting them too. And there is someone that I've covered on this channel recently who's talked about exactly this scenario, and that someone is a UFO experiencer, Chris Bledsoe. As you'll be aware if you watched this episode, Chris is in contact with the luminous, divine feminine figure that he calls the Lady. In 2012, she gave him a prophecy about the star Regulus and a new knowledge coming into the world, which I covered in some detail in that same video. Chris thinks it could happen in 2026. To be clear, the astrology I'm looking at suggests to me that the situation in the Middle East isn't letting up anytime soon. The Aries ingress charts for both Israel and Iran, which tell us about the year for those countries beginning at the spring equinox, suggest to me that both of them will be at war. I'm painting a grim picture here, I know. But as I said in my 2026 forecast, I have an intuitive feeling that this year could also see something resembling divine intervention, some kind of weird but inspiring events that totally changes the lay of the land. As I've said in many earlier videos, conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune bring a kind of thinning of the veil. Manifest reality is permeated by a sense of spiritual import. There was one of these conjunctions in 1917, also a time of war when the miracle of Fatima and the miracle of the sun happened in Portugal. These were events that had a massive influence on Catholics and their faith in particular. But that Regulus prophecy is not the only thing that Lady has shared with Chris. She also gave him warnings about devastating events that would take place before this new knowledge arrived. Here's what Bledsoe told Australian UFO journalist Ross Coulthart in an interview last year.
One thing she told me was, when you see Iran and Israel exchanging missiles, and I saw it, the way she tells me is a vision of, I see it like a living picture screen. I could see the rockets flying. Then all of a sudden, orbs appeared out of the ocean and everywhere. And I told the government, if this happens, the orbs are going to appear and wake people up and stop it. That's what she told me.
Indeed, there are already claims that this is happening. People have been sharing this video, supposedly showing an orb that appeared in Iran just before the US-Israeli attacks. But I also want to urge caution here. It could conceivably be that this is all part of one great, long-planned manipulation. We are very much in the age of the deepfake now, so do be judicious about what you choose to believe. All right, that's it for this video. In the bonus section available for members of the channel, whether here on YouTube or at my website, we now consider the theme of false flags. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon.